At 77, Lucille Ball reveals the 5 actors she hated the most. Everyone thinks they know Lucille Ball. The laugh. The red hair. The woman who made America happy every Monday night. But what if I told you, behind that laughter was a woman who never forgot a betrayal? A woman who quietly kept score. 5 names. 5 people so deeply resented that time, success, and fame could never erase them. These weren't strangers. They were legends, friends, lovers, even the man she built an empire with. Tonight, we're not talking about the jokes. We're opening the book Lucille Ball never wanted you to read. And by the end of this video, you may never see her smile the same way again. Joan Crawford, When a Goddess Falls. Before Lucille Ball became a queen, she was a believer. In the 1940s, long before television bowed to her will, Lucille was just another woman wandering the MGM lot, standing in the shadows of giants. And towering above all of them was Joan Crawford. Joan wasn't just famous, she was mythic. Every entrance felt choreographed by destiny. Every glance carried power. She was what Hollywood promised it could turn you into if you survived long enough. Lucille watched her from a distance, quietly studying how a legend moved, how authority looked when wrapped in fur and diamonds. To Lucille, Joan Crawford wasn't just an actress. She was proof that greatness was possible. But time has a cruel sense of humor. By 1968, the roles had reversed so completely it felt unreal. Lucille Ball was no longer chasing approval, she was signing checks. She ran Desi Studios. She owned the stage, the cameras, the laughter. She wasn't a guest in Hollywood anymore. She was its architect. Joan Crawford, meanwhile, was fading. So when Joan was booked to guest star on The Lucy Show, it should have been a celebration. A passing of the torch. A moment where 2 eras shook hands. Lucille believed that version of the story, right up until Joan walked onto the set. She was late. She was unfocused. And worst of all, she was unprepared. To Lucille, the studio wasn't a playground. It was sacred ground. Comedy, to her, was math. Precision. Timing. Discipline. You didn't stumble through it. You didn't improvise your way out of respect. And you certainly didn't show up intoxicated and expect reverence to carry you. Watching Joan's slur lines wasn't just disappointing. It was devastating. This wasn't some difficult co-star. This was the woman Lucille had once placed on a pedestal, now wobbling on it. Each missed cue felt like a crack in something sacred. Each excuse felt like betrayal. Lucille didn't scream. She didn't humiliate her with words. She did something colder. She watched. And then she worked her. During rehearsals, Lucille turned the set into a proving ground. A physical comedy sequence. Demanding. Repetitive. Exhausting. And again. And again. Every stumble earned another run. Every complaint was met with silence and another command. No insults. No mercy. Just work. It was power stripped of theatrics, and that made it worse. The crew felt it. The tension wasn't loud. It was suffocating. Lucille wasn't punishing Joan out of cruelty. She was punishing her for disrespecting the craft. For confusing past glory with present discipline. By the end of the week, Joan Crawford, the goddess of Hollywood, was reduced to a tired woman retreating to her dressing room, defeated not by insults, but by the unbearable weight of reality. Later, she would whisper to a friend words that echoed for years. They call me a monster, but Lucille Ball is worse. But the truth was more complicated. Lucille didn't win that battle feeling victorious. She won it feeling empty. Because what she crushed wasn't just a diva, it was her own illusion. The belief that legends age gracefully. The belief that respect is automatic. The belief that talent alone is enough. That week hardened her. It taught Lucille Ball a lesson she would never forget. Excellence doesn't care who you used to be. And nostalgia is useless on a working set. Joan Crawford didn't just fall from grace in Lucille's eyes. She became a warning. A reminder that discipline is the only thing that keeps greatness alive. And that when it dies, even gods are replaceable. Richard Burton, When High Art Meets Low Tolerance. If Joan Crawford was a fallen goddess, Richard Burton was something far more dangerous. He didn't arrive broken. He arrived convinced. By the time Richard Burton stepped onto the set of Here's Lucy in 1970, he wasn't just a famous actor, he was an institution. Shakespearean stages bowed to him. Critics treated his voice like scripture. And at his side stood Elizabeth Taylor, the most photographed woman on earth. Together, they weren't guests. They were royalty. To the world, their appearance on Lucille Ball's sitcom looked like unity, cinema embracing television, prestige shaking hands with popularity. To Lucille, it felt like an invasion. Burton didn't hide his contempt. He carried it openly, like a badge of honor. Sitcoms, to him, weren't art. They were obligation. He didn't believe in the repetition, the rewrites, the relentless rehearsal. Comedy wasn't sacred. It was something you endured between serious roles. And Lucille Ball? She wasn't a peer. She was a ringmaster. That was his mistake. Lucille sensed it immediately, that subtle curl of disdain, the way he treated the script like something beneath him. He tolerated her notes. He didn't respect them. Every instruction she gave was met with that stare, cold, distant, aristocratic, the look of a man who believed his talent excused his arrogance. What Burton never understood was that Lucille Ball had built her empire on one unbreakable rule. Everyone earns the laugh. Behind the scenes, the clash became silent warfare. Burton found the process absurd. The timing, the physicality, the microscopic obsession with rhythm. Lucille found his attitude insulting. Not just to her, but to the audience. Years later, his private diaries would reveal what he never dared say aloud on set. He called her humorless, charmless, a monster. To call the woman who made the world laugh, without humor, wasn't criticism. It was erasure. Lucille felt it, not as anger, but as humiliation. She was the most powerful woman in television, yet here stood a man who made her feel small simply by refusing to take her world seriously. So she did what she always did when challenged. She tightened control. She didn't argue philosophy. She didn't demand respect. She rewrote the battlefield. The script called for Burton to disguise himself as a plumber. Slapstick, absurd, deeply unflattering. It was the exact opposite of the regal image he protected. And Lucille leaned into it. Every gag, every fall, every beat. On stage 21, Shakespeare didn't matter. Timing did. She rehearsed him until resistance became exhaustion. Until dignity surrendered to necessity. Until the joke landed not because Burton believed in it, but because the machinery of Lucille Ball's production left him no choice. The episode was a triumph. Ratings soared. Audiences loved it. On screen, Burton sparkled. Off screen, the air was ice cold. Lucille had won. But victory came with a cost. She had been forced to defend her art in her own house, against a guest who ate at her table while mocking the meal. Burton left without apology, without admiration, without learning anything except this. On Lucille Ball's stage, talent without humility meant nothing. The question lingers long after the cameras stop rolling. Was Burton right to protect his dignity? Or was Lucille right to demand submission to the audience's joy? The truth is uncomfortable, because this wasn't about comedy versus drama. It was about respect. And for Lucille Ball, nothing was more unforgivable than a man who looked down on the work that made millions feel alive. Richard Burton wasn't just another difficult guest. He was proof that even kings can be made small, if they forget whose kingdom they're standing in. Joan Blondell, when friendship becomes collateral damage. Richard Burton was an outsider, a visitor, a storm that passed through. Joan Blondell was different. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't a rival. She wasn't someone Lucille Ball needed to impress or defeat. Joan Blondell was a friend, and that made what happened far more devastating. When Vivian Vance finally stepped away from Lucille's side, the loss wasn't just professional. It was emotional. Vivian had been the anchor, the counterweight to Lucille's chaos, the one person who could ground her rhythm on screen. Replacing her wasn't about filling a role, it was about surviving without her. Joan Blondell seemed like fate's answer. She was experienced, fearless, a veteran of Hollywood's toughest studios. And more importantly, she and Lucille shared history. They had laughed together, struggled together, survived the same brutal system. There was trust. At least there used to be. But the Lucille Ball of the 1960s was no longer the woman Joan remembered. She wasn't just an actress anymore. She was the president of Desilu. Every episode carried the weight of a studio, a legacy, a reputation that could collapse with a single misstep. Pressure changes people. On the set of The Lucy Show, the line between friendship and authority began to blur. Lucille didn't notice it at first. She was focused on the mechanics, the timing, the blocking, the precision. She wasn't talking to a friend anymore. She was managing a problem. During a difficult rehearsal, Joan missed a beat. Then another. It was minor, fixable, the kind of moment friends work through quietly. But Lucille snapped. Not privately, not gently, in front of the cast, the crew, the audience. She dissected Joan's performance piece by piece, her words sharp and surgical. Every note felt like a public stripping of dignity. This wasn't direction, it was domination. For a younger actress, fear might have followed. Silence. Compliance. But Joan Blondell was no rookie. She had clawed her way through Warner Brothers. She had survived studio bosses, predatory contracts, and decades of being underestimated. She wasn't disposable, and she knew it. The room froze when she looked Lucille Ball in the eye. Then she said it. "Go yourself, Lucille." And she walked. No dramatic pause. No negotiation. No return. The door didn't just close on a scene, it closed on a friendship. What lingered afterward wasn't chaos, but silence. The kind that exposes everything. Lucille stood alone on the stage she ruled, surrounded by people who suddenly understood the cost of crossing her, and the cost of standing too close. She had won control, and lost something irreplaceable. Joan Blondell didn't leave because she couldn't perform. She left because respect had been traded for efficiency. Because loyalty cannot survive humiliation, no matter who signs the checks. For Lucille, the lesson cut deeper than any professional clash. This wasn't about ego. It was about isolation. Power had given her authority, but it had also stripped away softness. She had begun to treat friends like employees, and employees like machinery. And machinery doesn't love you back. That day, Lucille Ball learned one of the cruelest truths of leadership. You can command obedience. You can buy talent. But you cannot direct loyalty. Joan Blondell's exit wasn't loud. It was final. And it left Lucille with a realization she would carry for the rest of her life. The higher you climb, the fewer people are allowed to stand beside you. William Frawley, the neighbor she couldn't escape. Some people hurt you once and disappear. William Frawley hurt Lucille Ball every day, and stayed. To the world, he was Fred Mertz. The grumpy landlord. The lovable foil. The man who made Lucy's chaos even funnier by resisting it. But off camera, William Frawley was not a character. He was a problem. From the beginning, casting him was a calculated risk. Hollywood had already written him off. A washed-up vaudevillian with a reputation for bitterness, cruelty, and alcohol. When Desi Arnaz insisted on hiring him, it came with one condition. Miss a show, and you're gone. Frawley never missed a show. That was the tragedy. He arrived on time. He hit his marks. His timing was flawless. He delivered laughs like a surgeon. And that made him untouchable. Lucille respected his talent. She despised everything else. He radiated negativity, the kind that seeps into walls, that lingers long after a room empties. Where Lucille thrived on optimism and momentum, Frawley lived in cynicism. Every day on stage, 21 felt like walking into a room that smelled of stale smoke and resentment. But the real poison wasn't just between Lucille and Frawley. It was the war between Frawley and Vivian Vance. On screen, Fred and Ethel were comedy gold. Off screen, they loathed each other with surgical precision. Vivian resented being paired with a man decades older, a man she felt humiliated her by association. Frawley, in return, unleashed cruelty, mocking her appearance, her age, her worth. Lucille stood between them. Every day. She wasn't just the star. She was the mediator, the protector, the shock absorber. She directed scenes of marital bickering knowing that the hatred beneath them was real and volatile. For someone obsessed with control, this was torture. And then there was the drinking. Frawley hid it well, but not well enough. Lucille saw the shaking hands, the hollow eyes, the mints meant to mask liquor. Every rehearsal carried the silent fear that today might be the day he collapsed. For Lucille, working with him was a high-wire act without a net. He was essential to the machine and capable of destroying it at any moment. So she endured. She smiled when cameras rolled. She laughed when scripts demanded it. She tolerated a man she didn't respect because the audience needed him, and Lucille Ball never put her comfort above the show. When William Frawley died suddenly in 1966, the world mourned Fred Mertz. Lucille did not. She acknowledged his talent. She honored his contribution. But there was no grief, no tribute, no tears. Not because she was cruel, because she was relieved. You don't mourn the person who made survival a daily effort. You don't grieve when a burden finally lifts. Frawley wasn't her enemy. He wasn't her friend. He was her sentence. And when it ended, all that remained was exhaustion, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the price of greatness is learning how to endure the unbearable. Desi Arnaz, the love that broke her. William Frawley was a burden. Desi Arnaz was a wound. You can replace a co-star. You can endure a colleague. But you cannot armor yourself against the person who helped build your soul. Before the betrayals, before the headlines, before the silence, there was a love story that felt impossible. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz weren't just married, they were a revolution. Hollywood told them no at every turn. A red-haired American woman and a Cuban bandleader couldn't sell romance. They wouldn't work on screen. America wouldn't accept them. They were wrong. Together, Lucille and Desi didn't just succeed, they changed the industry. They built Desilu from nothing. They created I Love Lucy and, with it, a new language of television. Their chemistry wasn't scripted. It was real. The laughter came from affection. The timing came from intimacy. When Desi looked at Lucille, it wasn't acting. For a moment, they were untouchable. But empires crack from the inside. As the pressure mounted, Desi unraveled. The charm remained, but behind it came alcohol, gambling, and women whose names Lucille never wanted to learn. Each betrayal cut deeper because it wasn't private. It was public. Headlines, whispers, late nights that turned into shame by morning. And still, Lucille smiled for the cameras. That was the cruelty. She didn't just endure infidelity, she was forced to perform happiness while her marriage collapsed behind the set walls. Every episode of I Love Lucy became a lie she had to perfect. The audience laughed. America believed. And Lucille went home alone. Desi didn't just cheat on her. He dismantled the illusion they had built together. For Lucille, that was unforgivable. Not because she was proud, but because she had believed. She had trusted him with her heart, her career, her reputation. And he returned it fractured. The anger that followed wasn't cold. It burned. It was rage born from love that refused to die. That is why Desi sits at the top of her list. Not because she hated him the most, but because she loved him beyond endurance. Their divorce wasn't an ending. It was an amputation. They remained business partners. Parents. Tethered by a history too powerful to erase. Even years later, friends knew the truth. Desi was the only man who could still make Lucille laugh, and the only one who could still make her cry. He was the prince who lifted her into the spotlight, and the traitor who let her fall. In the end, Desi Arnaz represented the ultimate lesson of Lucille Ball's life. You can conquer Hollywood, command laughter, and build an empire, but you cannot save someone who refuses to save themselves. Her resentment wasn't bitterness. It was survival. A shield against the knowledge that the greatest love of her life was also her greatest failure. And that is the cost no amount of success can ever erase. In the end, Lucille Ball's story was never about hatred. It was about cost. Every name we've walked through, the fallen idol, the arrogant king, the broken friendship, the unbearable colleague, the love that shattered her, they weren't enemies by accident. They were the toll booths on the road she chose. To protect excellence. to guard a standard no one else was willing to hold. Lucille Ball didn't keep an invisible ledger because she was cruel. She kept it because memory was the armor that allowed her to survive. In an industry that rewarded softness on camera and punished it off-screen, she learned to trade warmth for precision. She learned that laughter demanded sacrifice, that perfection required isolation, and that being loved by millions often meant being misunderstood by those closest to you. The world remembers Lucy Ricardo, the woman who fell, flailed, and made us laugh without effort. But behind that smile stood Lucille Ball, calculating, relentless, and often alone, carrying the weight of an empire so others could forget their pain for 30 minutes at a time. And maybe that's the uncomfortable truth we avoid. Greatness isn't gentle. It doesn't come from kindness alone. It comes from the willingness to endure being called cold, to be misunderstood, to be remembered as difficult, so the work itself can live forever. So before we judge the woman behind the laughter, we should ask ourselves one question. Would the joy have survived if she had been softer? Lucille Ball paid the price so the laughter never did. And if this story made you see her differently, if it made you think about the cost of excellence in your own life, then share this video with someone who understands what it means to carry a standard alone. Subscribe for stories they never taught you about the legends you thought you knew. Because behind every smile that lasts forever, there is a strength no one ever sees.